Hey everyone, welcome back to another Synthetic Dreams tutorial. Today we're going to be talking about a tool that I think is essential for any command line user, especially if you regularly connect to remote servers over SSH, and that tool is tmux. I discovered it about 4 years ago and have been using it every day since. I use it at work, I teach it to my classes, I spread the word to everyone I can about it. It's really an amazing application. So, I'll cover details in a moment, but I first want to differentiate this video from a lot of the other tmux videos on YouTube. This is going to be a general tutorial on how to use tmux, but I'm going to show you my setup and my workflow for using it for bioinformatics and analysis. So hopefully this tutorial will be useful for you in either case. Before we jump into the tutorial, let's talk about what tmux is and what it can do. tmux is what's known as a terminal multiplexer. It allows you to have multiple different terminal sessions open simultaneously in a tightly integrated keyboard-controlled environment without having to juggle dozens of different terminal windows. You can split your screen into different configurations using a single SSH connection without needing to reconnect to the server each time. Additionally, it can be run remotely and allows your software to continue to run even if your session disconnects from things like turning your computer off or losing your Wi-Fi connection. Multiple computers can also connect to the same session simultaneously, so you can connect from a home computer while you're at work or on the go and always be looking at the same output. While there are a few other alternatives like Screen, tmux contains a lot of novel features and is definitely my preferred multiplexer. Okay, so let's cover how to work with tmux sessions, how to split your screen into different panes, some useful configuration options, and also a few other details. Okay, so before we start using tmux, I first want to take a look at the tmux configuration file. Tmux supports a number of options. One of them that's really useful is to turn on mouse support. Now, one of the features of tmux is how powerful it is just using the keyboard. But the mouse can be really useful as well. So I want to turn that on. There's a couple other options I want to look at as well. So that configuration file is located right in your home directory. If it doesn't exist yet, you're going to need to create it. So it's a .tmux.conf. That's the name of the file. So I do have it. It already exists for me. So I'm going to edit it. So I only have 3 options in here. tmux supports a lot of different options. But the one I want to focus on is this first option first. You definitely want to have that enabled if you do want mouse support in tmux, which I really suggest. So all these start with set. So it's the set-G mouse on. Now this option has changed a little bit over different versions of tmux. So just make sure that you're running a newer version of tmux. If you get any weird error messages, it means that your version of tmux might be a little older. Another option that's good to know about is the history limit. That's how much of a buffer it keeps for your output buffer, how much of a history it keeps. So this is 10,000 lines. If you do need to override the screen type, the terminal type that it comes back with for different programs that use that field, you can override it here, and I've overridden it to add some 256 color support. But the biggie is the mouse, turning the mouse configuration on so that you'll have mouse support. Okay, so let's save that. So you'll save that new file if you don't have it already. All right, so once you've got that configuration file saved, tmux has a couple of ways of launching it. You can just type tmux, but I want to go over creating a session because the powerful part of tmux is being able to reconnect into an existing session. So first off, if you want to create a new session, the command is tmux new for doing a new session. And generally you want to name your sessions. You can have different sessions open. You can have multiple different sessions. So you'll want to name them something different so you can reconnect into different sessions. So you'll do -s and then the name of the session. So I'm just going to do test1, for instance. Boom. Okay. So once your tmux is running, the first thing you're going to notice is down at the bottom of the screen, you're going to get this green bar. Unless you've overridden that, it's going to be a green bar. It's going to have the name of your session on the left here. It's going to report your machine name and the time, the date, and things like that. So if you want to make sure that you're in tmux, you should always see that green bar at the bottom. Now, once you're in tmux, there's a couple of ways of getting out of tmux. Either if you want to end your session, then you do it one way, and if you want to just disconnect from the session and leave everything running and all the output on the screen, then you'll do the second way. So first, let's just talk about ending the session. So when you're running tmux and you just want to end your session, if you have no panes left, and we'll talk about what a pane is in a second, if you just type exit, that's actually gonna end your session. Your session's done, all the output's done, all the programs have ended running. There's nothing left. So now we're able to create a new session with the same name, because from tmux's point of view, this is a completely new session. We go in and now we're in a new session again. But let's say that we have something on the screen, we've done some work, there's something running, and we don't want to get rid of it, we just want to disconnect to it and come back to it later. In that case, here's where you're going to start using the tmux commands. By default, all the commands that you're going to issue in tmux start with Control B, and then you let go of Control B, and then you press one of the letter codes to perform a command. So in this case, we want to disconnect, and a lot of times they'll start with the letter of the action you want to take. So for disconnecting, it's lowercase d. So I'm going to press Control B, let go, and then press a lowercase d. That disconnects. Don't hold down Control B while pressing the D. You got to hit Control B, let go, and then hit the command. So we hit D to disconnect. And you'll see right on the screen, detached from the particular session. In this case, it was session 1 that we disconnected from. So if we do want to reconnect into the session, it's going to be tmux. And now we're not going to say new, we're going to say attach. We want to attach into an existing session. The command line option changes slightly. It's no longer -s, now it's -t. And then we give the name of the session we want to connect into. So in this case, it's test1. We press enter, and boom, we're right back to our session before. You can see all the output on the screen of what we were working with before. Nothing is lost. If there was a program that was running, it continues to run. So for instance, we can illustrate that. I'm just going to run top for a second. You know, it's actively running. I'm going to hit Control B and then D to disconnect. So I'm back at the command prompt outside of tmux. But if I attach back into tmux, you can see that top is still running. It didn't quit. It ran the entire time. So now I'm going to quit out of that. So that's how we disconnect and reconnect into a session. And you can have multiple sessions running at different times with different names. So you can connect to one session, disconnect, connect to a different session, have as many as you need. If you do forget the names of your sessions, you can do tmux list-sessions. And that's going to list right here all the names of sessions. So you can see the test 1 that I'm in right now, and I also have a previous one that I'm running on a different screen called main. So you can have multiple running or disconnected sessions at the same time. Okay, so I'm just going to clear the output of that. So once you're in tmux and you've got the green bar at the bottom, what can be really useful is to split the screen into what are called panes. And you're actually creating new terminal sessions inside your tmux session, separate terminal sessions. So you can do either horizontal or vertical panes and kind of arrange them in whatever order you want. So to split the screen into different horizontal panes, you're going to do your Control B again, and then do a quote, the quote character. So you'll hold down Shift and hit the quote. And as you can see, now we've split the screen into 2 different horizontal splits. We got the top and bottom here, and they're actually both separate terminal sessions. We can have a command run up here and a command run down here. So for instance, if I run top down here, you can see it's running the bottom pane, and the top pane is free to run something else. Now, since I did activate mouse support, I can just click in that pane and run something up here. I can run my ls, and I can do some work up here. And if I need to get back down to the top window, I can click down there, hit Q to quit out, run some different command. Maybe I want to change directories. Maybe I want to do something else. You can also use the keyboard to switch between panes as well. To do that, you'll do Control B and then just the arrow keys in the direction that you want to move. So pressing up will move us to the top pane, and pressing bottom will move us to the bottom pane. It's completely your preference on if you use the mouse or keyboard or a combination of both. Why the mouse is really useful when using panes, however, is not just for switching panes, but it's also you can use this to resize your panes. So you can actually click your mouse and drag, and it will actually resize the panes and where that split is put on the screen, which is super useful. So you could actually make multiple splits. So if we go to our top pane, and now instead of doing Control B and quote, I'm going to do Control B and %. When you do %, that's going to give you a vertical split. And again, we can still resize that in whatever orientation we want. And we can really configure our window to have multiple different terminal sessions open simultaneously in the exact size and organization that really works for you. And once you've been working in these panes for a while, your output is going to start stacking up. And this goes back to that buffer I talked about. What's nice is for each of these different panes, you can actually scroll back and see the history. And actually, if you do have mouse support turned on, it does support the scroll wheel. So you can just scroll back and you can see, oh, here's my full history. It goes back to in this case, 10,000 lines that I defined in the configuration file. But it can be really nice if you're working in different windows and or different panes, you need to see what happened in each pane, what the full history was. You can scroll back through that, which is also really nifty. And related to that, tmux also supports temporarily zooming one of your panes. So, scrolling is great, but sometimes you want to work just with a single pane and you want to get that extra real estate. So in that case, you can do a Control B and then lowercase z, and that's short for zoom. And it will take whatever your current pane is and fill the entire screen up with just that pane. Your other panes are continuing to run whatever software is running in them. The output is still stored, but you're currently just focusing on one of the panes and it's taking up all the screen real estate, which is nice when you want to temporarily do work in a single pane. If you need to get back, you just issue the same command again, just Control B and then Z, and you can see all the output is still there. It keeps the pane configurations exactly the shapes and the number of panes that you had before. It will continue to maintain all of those. So zooming is really useful, especially if you're cramped in one of the panes and you need to temporarily take a look at the output. If you just generate a lot of output and need to temporarily look at it, it can be really useful. And if you do need to get rid of one of your panes, there's a couple different ways of doing it. There is actually a shortcut method for tmux where you can hit Control B and then lowercase x. It will confirm at the bottom, do you want to kill the pane? If you say yes, it'll get rid of your pane. So that's one way of doing it, but you can actually just simply type exit as well. That's going to get rid of the pane as well. And again, if you continue to type exit onto your last pane, as we showed before, that's actually going to completely end your tmux session. So just be aware that if you keep typing exit past your last pane, it will eventually quit out of tmux completely, and you'll have to recreate your session to get back into it. Okay, so those are the basic commands for using tmux. There are a lot of different commands. Tmux also supports multiple different windows and flipping back and forth between them, naming your sessions, naming your windows, naming your panes, things like that. Switching the order of your panes. I'm actually going to post the link to some good tmux shortcuts and some documentation in the YouTube description below because there's more options than what we have time to go over. And depending on your workflow and the way you work within tmux, certain commands could be more useful than others. So I encourage you to take a look at those shortcut commands and see which ones would work best for you. I do think, though, that understanding how to use panes and disconnecting and reconnecting into sessions are kind of central to using tmux in general, so I did want to cover those. So I'm going to post those below. And now that we have a good understanding of how to work with the basics of tmux, I kind of want to show my workflow that I tend to use at work and at home for when I'm doing any kind of analysis or bioinformatics work, or really any kind of programming in general. This pane configuration tends to work well for me. Depending on the way you do things, you might want to modify it or do something completely different. But I'll show you what I tend to do. And I actually have a script file that I set up that sets these all up automatically so I don't have to create them manually each time. But I tend to kind of do my configuration like this. So after running a new tmux session, I'll generally first make a horizontal split and then do a vertical split on the top. And in the top left-hand corner, I usually have top running. You can see it looks a little squished right now. For the purposes of recording the video, the text is a little bigger, but tmux does automatically resize. You can see I'm resizing the text size down right now, and tmux is automatically reformatting everything so it fits properly. When you have it in normal size, this is going to look a lot better, but for the purposes of recording the video, I'm going to keep it that larger size. So let's kind of go back to that larger size for a second. So I tend to have my top left as my top window just because, one, I tend to run a lot of software that's very CPU and memory intensive, so it's really nice to kind of keep track of what's going on. Is this thing using as many cores as I expect it to use? Am I going over on cores? Am I not utilizing them correctly? Am I way overusing memory? Am I in some kind of loop? It can really help to have a top window running at all times. Generally, in the top right, and I'll resize this a little bit so that I'll get a bigger top right. This is where I tend to do my text editing for editing source code or editing configuration files or things like that. So if I have a file here that I need to look at, if I need to look at source code or if I need to edit something, I'll do it in this window. When the size is more realistic, you get a good amount of edit space right here to do your source code here and write your Python code or your shell code or anything like that. At the bottom, I always like to have a free spot to issue actual terminal commands, actually shell commands. So here's where I can actively do something while I'm coding up here. If I need to look at a source file, if I need to look at a data file, if I need to check if I just produce something, if I need to run a script and I need to check the output, I can do it down here. This is really useful to have this on screen while I'm doing my coding. So if I need to, for instance, parse a text file, parse a data file, I can actively look at the contents of the file down here while I'm coding, which is nice. I tend to really make use of the tabview command, which I'll post a link to in the notes as well. This is for viewing any kind of delimited files, tab delimited or comma delimited files. So if I'm working, for instance, with a tab delimited file, this one right here, and as you can see, that was off the screen, so I just scrolled up using my scroll on my mouse, and I'm going to look at this. So down here, I have my nice tab delimited data that I can kind of scroll back and forth down here. Then I can click up here. I can do my source code up here, etc. All the while, I can make sure that over and top that things aren't running, aren't out of control, aren't using too much memory. I'm using the number of cores that I expect to. A lot of times I'll also add another split here. And if I'm really concerned with some kind of performance issues, I can run a utility like nmon or something similar and take a look at, for instance, disk usage or network usage if I'm doing something network intensive. Again, this looks a little cramped right now. On a normal screen, it won't look this cramped. And I'll just actually resize this a little bit so it's not too bad. But you can see, you're actively able to do some editing here. You can do some commands and viewing down here, and then you've got your monitoring here. Setting it up in that kind of way, or whatever way works best for you, but having kind of a different dedicated session, especially if you continue to work in that manner, it really helps, for me anyway, to get into a habit of always having these windows and these configurations or something based on them. It just kind of trains me to know, oh, I look at the top left when I'm interested in this, I look at the top right when I'm working, I look at the bottom for this. The more you kind of train yourself and get in the habit of doing these things, the faster and faster you get at manipulating your data, working with it, looking at your source code and working with it, and kind of integrating the two back and forth. Can really help to kind of develop those habits. But whatever works better for you. You might have different contexts depending on what you're working on. If you're doing source, if you're writing source code, if you're writing some kind of script, you might want to work in a certain configuration. Whereas if you're looking at data, you might want to work in a completely different configuration. And it's also going to be a lot different depending on the particular domain you're working in. If you're doing, system administration, if you're doing programming, if you're doing data science, some type of analysis, it could be completely different. But the nice thing is that you have, all the options of how you want those panes configured and arranged. It's really a powerful, versatile tool for formatting exactly the way you want. So hopefully this tutorial has given you some idea on how you might use tmux in your command line work. And if you found this video useful, please like and comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can catch all future tutorials. Also, please let me know in the comments if there's any specific topics you'd like to see covered in a future tutorial. Thanks for watching, bye for now!